What's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back in to bring you our 10.2 Holy Priest Guide for Season 3, giving you everything you need to know to be prepared for Holy Priest in the Amirdrassil raid. Holy is, of course, one of the best specs to get started with when you're new to healing, and it's still going to be a successful healer in Season 3, despite a number of nerfs to some other major cooldowns. In this video, we're going to be going over the talents, stats, spell priority, some of the trinkets you want to make sure you're watching for, and how best to utilize your abilities to maximize your output in a raid. When it comes to talents, and of course, you can copy the talent profiles and everything in my Wowhead guides linked in the description down below. This is going to be about the standard build that you're going to be going for in a raiding environment. Of course, you're getting a number of renews that are being applied pretty naturally, which will tie into our tier set when we talk about it, of like revitalizing prayers and benediction, which are always going to have some manner of like consistent renews that are going out onto the raid. And we're going to be working off of Miracle Worker just as we had previously, because not only does it have good synergy with our tier set, but also with Divine Image, which also ties really well into the tier set, which gives us lots of extra holy words on hand. So you're able to constantly be casting holy words, constantly being able to generate new ones with talents like Answered Prayers, which will proc Apotheosis, which is usually a Mythic Plus talent. We get short procs of it in a raiding environment where you're able to accelerate the return of your holy words whenever you're receiving that Apotheosis uptime. Even though there were nerfs to Salvation, you still are running that and, of course, Symbol of Hope. They're still powerful cooldowns, but they've just been noticeably nerfed. And how you play around Epiphany in particular, and, of course, Answered Prayers, makes a really big difference on the total cooldown that Holy Word Salvation has, because it puts Renew and tons of healing and Prayer of Mending onto everybody in the raid, but it has a 12-minute cooldown that's reduced by having more holy words being utilized. And so the more that you're able to generate more words, the more cooldown reduction you are netting for Salvation. We do have Chastise, which actually does synergize with Epiphany, but if you're needing more mana, especially with the loss of her shocks, Enlightenment is a great talent to be able to take instead of Chastise. When in a raiding environment, you want to make sure you're focusing on Crit Strike first, followed by Mastery, then Versatility, and then Haste. This tier in particular, we're going to be hitting our sort of diminishing return points, which are, depending on which stat you have, around 5100 to 5400 stat rating, where they will begin to diminish in value. And it's very likely that both Crit and Mastery could actually hit those different points, and you'd be picking up pieces with Versatility. And so that is to say, in practice, item level and overall item level is of the most important value for you when you're playing Holy. And of course, you don't really want to target that much haste, but you're naturally going to pick up haste gear, and that's okay. The spec doesn't really rely on having speedier cast to be able to produce more effective output. And so as a result, you're not really utilizing much of it in a raid. I touched on this briefly before, but our tier sets for Holy Priest, the 2 set is giving you a Holy Word Serenity and Sanctify Renew application benefits. That is to say, Serenity is applying really lengthy renews onto one target, while Sanctify is applying shorter renews to the 5 allies that it's dropping healing onto. And when you put it together with the 4 set bonus, all those renews, both the ones we mentioned in your talents with Revitalizing Prayers and Benediction, but also the renews that you're applying from your Holy Word cast and your 2-piece, are actually giving you free Holy Words back. And this is really important because it feels like, by reading it, you would want to cast Renew, and that is not the case. The renews that you're getting from both your talents and your tier set are more than enough to be able to net additional holy words for you to benefit, because the way that this set bonus works is like having more renews out doesn't necessarily give you more holy words. It sort of has this like internal cooldown where it's only going to give you so many at a time. So even when you apply renew to the entire raid by casting Salvation, you don't instantly hit your 2 stacks of the additional holy words. Also, these holy words, they're not incurring a charge, they're not resetting the cooldown of your holy words, and they're costing 50% less mana. So in order to actually take advantage of the free charge, you could say, for the holy words, you need to already have a charge available of the word that you want to utilize. And so when you're in a raid, most of the time you want to spend these bonuses onto Sanctify. And so if you've used both of your Sanctify charges, you then cannot use that proc, and if you needed to spot heal somebody naturally by using Serenity, it would consume the proc because that's the holy word you're using with the buff available. Of course, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to check out our Patreon, or of course consider joining the channel as one of our members as well. Like I just mentioned, if you don't have a holy word available, you're not going to be able to spend those free procs, and in a lot of cases when you're using abilities like Serenity, you need to be using them for heavy single target output, for spot healing. And so as a result, the gameplay you really want to focus on is, of course, making sure you're using your Prayer of Mending on cooldown as often as you can. I always throw it onto the tanks pretty much on cooldown because they'll always start the process of the Prayer of Mending jumps. I always want to make sure I'm using my Holy Word Sanctifies, but often I'll pool one unless there's a lot of damage going out. In that case, feel free to send it. But if there's like light to medium levels of damage, I might just sit on a Holy Word Sanctify cast so that when I receive 4-set procs, I'm then easily able to spend them on Sanctifies so that my Serenities are not getting consumed by the buff, and I'm then able to freely sort of pool those as needed for additional spot healing and always keeping the cooldown cycling, not overcapping on any of those Holy Words. So making sure you're always spending at least one charge of Sanctify and Serenity at all times, keeping Prayer of Mending on cooldown, and as raid damage is going to be going out, you want to make sure that you're using Circle of Healing first to then benefit your Prayer of Healing with Prayer Circle, which is reducing the cost and reducing the cast time of the spell. And pretty much every single Prayer of Healing cast that you want to utilize needs to have Prayer Circle up, especially because our mana is a little tighter now that we don't have Rashaks on hand. Both Halo and Holy Nova are a very good healing output that you can have. Holy Nova in particular, if everybody's actually stacked, but both of those abilities have no interaction with your Holy Words whatsoever. And so what this means is that when you have really large amounts of damage going out, you might end up proccing Apotheosis from Answered Prayers. And what this does is all of your Holy Word cooldown reducing abilities, Circle, Prayer of Mending, Prayer of Healing, Flash Heal, all of these are then empowered in reducing your Holy Words even more. So a frequent mistake people make is casting Halo or Holy Nova while they have those buffs up, and then they're not getting as many Holy Words back as they otherwise could be. A great way to play around this is having a tracker for Answered Prayers. I use Luxos's Weak Cores and they're fantastic. And so when you see that you're approaching that 50 stack point for Answered Prayers, I like to make sure I kind of tee up, and assuming damage is going out, tee up my Circle of Healing or even hold it a little bit so that I can make sure that once Answered Prayers procs, I have the Prayer Circle buff, and then I can actually spam Prayer of Healings for cheap and quickly, and then be able to get my Sanctifies back extremely quickly. As I mentioned previously, you do want to make sure you're playing around Epiphany when it makes sense. Obviously, if somebody's taking crazy damage, you need to drop your Serenity, you need to drop your AoE healing into them immediately. But there's a lot of times you can send that Serenity very freely when there is moderate levels of damage going out. And this is an area where you want to make sure you play around Epiphany. In this instance, I'll potentially pool a Holy Word or two. You can easily do this with Chastise, but when it comes to Sanctify or Serenity, you can also do this too, where you'll wait to use those abilities until just after you hit your Prayer of Mending. That way, you're getting the maximum cooldown reduction effect for your Prayer of Mending to return it to you, getting more Prayer of Mendings out, which then gives you more Answered Prayers, which then gives you more Holy Words, which you could then use to continue the cycle of Epiphany. And then the cycle is going to be able to continue. And all those extra Holy Words give you more Salvation value and more Divine Image value. Because keep in mind, while Divine Image was nerfed, it's still really, really strong. And you make it stronger through the effective gameplay you're producing. Once again, many guides will be saying, hey, just use this ability on cooldown. Circle of Healing is the same way, that it's a solid ability and it's a very efficient ability, but you can also hold that a little bit and should hold that a little bit if you know that damage is going to be coming right around the corner. When you know that there's intense incoming damage out in this raid, you can even just wait the 2 or 3 seconds on your Circle of Healing cooldown, hit it before the damage is going out or just as it does, and then be ready to start slamming those Prayer of Healings, because you never want to be using Prayer of Healing, if you can help it, outside of your Prayer Circle buff. When it comes to Flash Heal and Heal, I pretty much am spending my Flash Heals freely, but I do like to pool them a lot, especially if there's movement on an encounter, because if I proc Answered Prayers into Apotheosis, ideally I'm casting Prayer of Healings, but then if you have to move, you can't do that. And so you have the extra Flash Heal procs on hand from Surge to be able to utilize when you're on the move, and then be able to get more cooldown reduction just in general, which is going to help Salvation, it's going to help Epiphany, it's going to help your set bonus, it helps everything. It's all connected. For your larger cooldowns, when possible, you want to make sure you're using Salvation pretty much immediately when you're going into raid encounters and organizing your cooldowns, right? You want to make sure, if possible, that Salvation is one of the first cooldowns that's getting utilized for the team, because it does have a longer cooldown and it'll probably be around 5 or 6 minutes. until you're going to be able to utilize it once again. To that end, making sure the more that you're playing around your cast, it's only going to be able to help make it more consistent. And it's also going to be very important that when you utilize Salvation, because you are putting Prayer of Mendings out onto everybody, you almost guarantee that you're going to be proccing Answer Prayers shortly after you activate Salvation. And so the best way to actually use this ability is right as damage happens, but also to make sure you're able to quickly tee up that Circle of Healing once again, so that when Answer Prayers does proc, you can find a spot to stand and plant your feet, and then be able to be casting as you receive the Apotheosis buff for more effective Holy Words. Now, you might have noticed that the other side of Apotheosis also says your Holy Words are free. This is sort of the secondary priority. Your top priority when you have Apotheosis uptime is to generate new words. Secondary would be spending words, and you never want to be casting spells that are not benefiting from one or the other, like Holy Nova or Halo. You want to make sure you don't use those if you can help it whatsoever during Apotheosis uptime. Divine Hymn, while frustrating because it's a very long channel to have to utilize, it is pretty decently strong, giving the extra healing buff that you can have on hand. A lot of times I like to use this during a progression environment for lengthier intermission phases. We kind of saw it on like Rashok, where it was like the beginning of intermission phases, you would channel that Divine Hymn, and then you'd be able to benefit from the healing buff for the rest of the phase. That's something you always want to make sure that you're keeping in mind. And if fights are less than friendly, Bops have been used, Spell Warding has been used, Guardian Spirit for yourself have all been utilized just to make it more consistent. And you should always be very aggressive with your Guardian Spirits as a cheat death effect, as an extra safety net that you can give to your allies, because especially when you're running the Guardian talent right below it, you're also going to make sure it gets reduced massively, and so it's not going to be a very lengthy or punishing cooldown. And even if it is, that means you just saved a life. Lastly, Symbol of Hope is substantially nerfed in this incoming tier, giving you 30 seconds of cooldown reduction for your major abilities instead of the 60 seconds, but it is still quite strong. Most of the abilities that it reduces, not all of them, but most of them are about a minute or a minute and a half in length. And so if you are organizing as a raid, areas where everyone should use their defensives together very early on, that 30 seconds plus the time it takes for another high damage ability to come out can often be extremely valuable to your entire team, as long as you're coordinating that everybody's using those defensives together. When your team is very uncoordinated, you could just make sure you're using it for yourself, using your defensive Desperate Prayer very early on, and then slamming it down early in the fight so that 3 or 4 minutes later you can use it again and benefit more from the missing mana and from the defensive cooldown recovery to be able to continue on in the fight and just play a lot safer. Holy Priest is usually a squishier healer, so if your group is extremely uncoordinated, it's great to call it, but at worst, make sure you're getting some kind of benefit from yourself out of it. And lastly, to cover some of the trinkets that you want to go over, Pip's Friendship Badge from Council of Dreams, Echoing Tearstone from, I believe it's the second part of Dawn of the Infinite, Sea Star from Throne of the Tides, and Coagulated Venusaur Blood are all pretty solid trinkets to be able to have on hand. All but the second one are stat sticks, which are just, kind of set and forget. The Tearstone, you kind of have to like charge up and you have to like use it, then do a lot of healing, and then it'll heal on its own. Most of the time, stat sticks are pretty much king, with Tearstone being a notable exception. The trinkets are very simple this raid tier, and there's not a lot of gameplay that you have to worry about to play around them. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and huge thank you to our patrons who make all of this content possible, as well as those joining onto the channel or checking out our live stream. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out our written guides down below. If there's any updates or major changes to the spec, we'll be having them there, or in a future video, depending on how big they are. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hope it helps, and I'll catch you all next time.